that literally mean?
We will go with what has been decided before.
Okay, that does what it means, but what does it literally say?
Wait, which one?
Stare decisis.
To stand by things, to sign it.
Yeah, let the decision stand, basically, is what we're talking about. So if the Supreme Court has issued a case, a previous decision, then other cases that go up through the federal courts should be guided by that decision if the facts are similar. And I had given you 2 examples. You remember what the 2 examples were? Abortion. Abortion is a good example. Its roots have dug into society for over 4 decades now. It's going to be really hard to overturn that. And I gave you the example of planting a tree and being able to pull it out of the ground. You could in a day, you could in a week, you could in 6 months, maybe with a shovel and a little bit of effort you could in a year. But if that tree's been growing for 43 years, you're not going to be able to pull it out of the ground. Abortion isn't going away. But what did go away? Go ahead.
Wasn't it a ruling that it was not legal to not stand up during the Pledge of Allegiance?
The flag salute cases. If you remember, these were those little kids, the Jehovah's Witness kids, that refused to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance in the fine state of West Virginia. What were this kid's argument? What did they say why they shouldn't have to stand?
Well, Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in worldly things.
Yeah, they're not going to be pledging allegiance to worldly bodies, pledging allegiance to a government. What was the school's argument?
It's un-American.
What's that?
It's un-American.
Schools are there to teach things like patriotism and respect, and this isn't a religious activity at all. So maybe the kids shouldn't have to basically, sacrifice their religion, but if this is about patriotism and citizenship and respect for the flag and American symbols, and this was going on in the Cold War, oh my God, we're just doing the country a service. What did the Supreme Court say? Did the kids win or did the school win?
School won.
The school won, and what happened?
The kid got lynched, or no, he got castrated.
The kids got lynched or castrated?
No,
Those
castrated.
are 2.
It's
Oh, just
castrated.
castrated, not lynched.
Yeah.
The kids got beaten up. The kids got tarred and feathered. The kids, one of them got castrated. And the Supreme Court caught an incredible amount of hell. And basically about a year later, on Flag Day, no less, the Supreme Court overturned this. Said, you know what, we might have made a mistake on this. We're going to let the kids respect their religious principles. And I guess the logic of it is that the longer a case remains valid law, the less likely it's ever going to be overturned. They got the flag salute case quick, so they were able to overturn it. Go ahead, Nicole. Let's go ahead and talk about the amendment fractions. What were those?
There's a lot.
Say what?
There's a lot.
Well, there's really just 2 amendment fractions, but there's a lot of other fractions, which we're basically going to jump into. In order to propose a constitutional amendment, what fraction, what vote do you need? 2/3 vote of the
House and the Senate.
of the House and the Senate. And in order to ratify it, what do you need?
3/4 of the state.
3/4 of the states, state legislatures, or ratifying conventions. So in other words, 2/3 and 3/4. What else do you need a 2/3 vote for?
Veto. To overturn a veto.
Overturn a presidential veto. 2/3 vote by the House, 2/3 vote by the Senate. We've already talked about 3/5, talked about 3/4. What was 9/13?
It was the constitutional vote that was necessary. So before it was 13/13, and they changed it to 9/13.
Article 7 of the Constitution says you need 9 of the 13 states to ratify. Do y'all remember why they picked 9?
Because that's how they did it.
Because they knew they had 9 and those other 4 they weren't sure about. What was 13/13?
100%.
Yeah, that's right.
Articles of
What was
Confederation.
100%? What's
It was
that?
from the Articles of Confederation.
What about the Articles of Confederation?
For anything to get passed in the Articles of Confederation, all the states had to agree. So for a budget, for making any decisions in terms of like big United States types thing, they needed everyone to agree.
Yeah, it needed to be unanimous. If you remember, the states basically said, we got stuff forced on us by the British. We're not going to have this stuff forced on us anymore. If one state says no, even if the other states say yes, it's 12-1, over 90%, it gets killed. Anything that passed had to be 13/13 or 100% unanimous. And in fact, they couldn't get this. The articles failed fairly quickly because things were not be allowed to be pushed onto the states. Anything else that jumps out from up here in Chapter 2 or Chapter 3?
Which one were you talking about right now?
These are just fractions in general. We started by the amendment fractions, but then we just started getting into fractions. So make sure that you're comfortable with these different fractions.
I'm not.
You're not. Okay, what question do you have?
You spoke really fast about all of that, and I was only able to get some of it down.
Okay, now all of it's going to be on the tape, so you're going to be able to rewind this. Go ahead, zoom in on it. Yeah, all of this you're going to be able to get. But remember, 1313's articles, 913's ratification of the Constitution. Somebody had asked before the idea of, okay, you know, would I ask how many articles are in the Constitution? I wouldn't, but if you remember, Article 5 deals with amendments. Article 6 dealt with two things. Do you remember what the two things were in Article 6?
The Supremacy Clause and the No Religious Oath
The
Requirement.
Supremacy Clause and the religious oath piece on this. Article 7 dealt with ratification. I might give you something about that. So kind of keep that thought in mind. So I'm not going to ask you, like, you know, what is Article 1, but Article 5, Article 6, Article 7, that one might be. Go ahead. Article 6 was the Supremacy Clause. The Constitution will be the supreme law of the land, and if states did something that was contrary, or the federal government did something that was contrary, the Constitution will win. And then the Constitution specifically forbid a religious oath or a religious test as a condition to hold office. So, and that was really the only example of freedom of religion that was included in the Constitution before they added the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments. Other questions from Chapter 3? Yes?
The New Jersey plan?
Okay, back to Chapter 2. What was the difference between the New Jersey plan and the Virginia plan? Go, Brenda.
One of them was a small state plan, that was New Jersey plan.
New Jersey plan was a small state plan.
And Virginia was the big state plan.
What body in the United States government did the New Jersey plan or the small state plan become?
The U.S. Senate.
The U.S. Senate. And what is significant about the U.S. Senate?
2 per state.
Equality. Small states wanted equal representation in the government because they feared that they would be swallowed up if the large states had an advantage. They have an advantage in the Senate. The Virginia plan became what? House of Representatives. And the Virginia plan based representation on?
Population.
Population. More people you got, the bigger the state you've got, or sometimes maybe the more money that you have, in fact, then the more representation that you'll have in the House of Representatives. The big states had the advantage. What plan did they ultimately come up with?
The Great Compromise.
Great Compromise or the Connecticut Compromise. I guess the Connecticutans like this. The Connecticut Compromise. And if you remember on this, the House became the Virginia plan, the Senate became the New Jersey plan, and basically they said, you're going to get your advantage on the Senate side, you're going to get your advantage on the House side, y'all figure it out once the government takes over. So that's basically what they did on that. Anything else that jumps out? In Chapter 3, make sure that you're comfortable with tax and spend, privileges and immunities, full faith and credit, and commerce. Make sure that you're really comfortable with those examples because I gave you a lot of examples for these. And if you're talking about scenario kind of questions, drinking age, prostitution, unemployment benefits, all of these would be good possibilities. Go ahead, Noel.
So can we come back on the full faith and credit clause?
Okay, what about the full faith and credit clause? I don't know. There were 4 things that the full faith and credit clause dealt with. But what did the full faith and credit clause say?
It's about making sure that like if a marriage license in one state, a license in one state is valid in all states.
If you have a valid legal document, if you've got a binding document from one state, then it would be recognized in the other states. And I've given you the example of a driver's license. You don't have to get a new driver's license. Gave you the example of a marriage license. You don't have to get a new marriage license. And then extradition, or the idea if you're wanted for a crime, you got an outstanding warrant, you would be extradited back to the state that actually wants you if you broke out of jail or something, that kind of a thing. And then this was also where the Fugitive Slave Clause came in, so kind of keep that thought in mind. Go ahead.
What was the Mann Act?
What was the Mann Act?
It was when you it was like if a man goes into if a man crosses state lines with the intention of doing something immoral with a woman, he can be prosecuted.
Oh yeah, Giovanni's smiling. Yeah, I remember that. I broke that law last week. No, see, I understand on this. The Mann Act basically says this was dealing with the white slave trade. And if you remember, there were women that were being kidnapped, and they were forced to basically, pimp them out, if you will. And sometimes, you go back 100 years, it wasn't like there were cell phones, it wasn't like there was internet, it wasn't like there were pay phones. I mean, it would be difficult to get back if you were carried a little bit away, but if you crossed state lines, it would be especially hard. They passed the Mann Act, and this was based on the commerce power. And they said if a man crosses state lines with a woman with immoral purposes in mind, then in fact he could be subject to really heightened criminal penalties. But if you notice on there, it didn't say prostitution, it said with immoral purposes. So what was the controversy that we talked about?
It can be used for anything, basically.
Like what exactly? Go ahead.
Going,
sex before marriage.
going to the beach, see women in swimsuits.
Okay, let's just not talk about that. Go back to sex before marriage.
Well, yeah, if you are in a relationship with someone but you aren't married yet, there are some places and religions that consider that immoral.
There would be some folks, and y'all got a little sheepish when I asked you what beaches you went to and if you went out of state, if you remember, and different things like this. And the idea is that a lot of you will go out of state. And what I also learned is that some of you specifically, what was it CT said? Same room, different bed? Some kind of, oh my God, some of the stuff that people said when I was interrogating them about, yeah, that's going to be on tape now, that's going to be awful. But you get the idea. So some of y'all said some awful things. And the idea basically is that y'all would cross state lines, you would eat, you would have lodging, you would buy gas. In other words, you were engaged in interstate commerce because you bought something and you crossed state lines. That now means that the government can regulate. Now, they're not looking for this, but if by chance they catch you for something else, they could prosecute you. And do you remember the governor example?